feel like it gets faster as you get older.
It does. I remember my aunt said an interesting thing. I never forget it. When I was young, before I went to jail, actually. When I was like 20 years old. She said, Jesse, from when I was born to 25 went slow. It was like kind of creeped along, but after from 25 to 50 went like a blink of an eye. And I never forget when she said that. And then I literally saw that happen. Remember the first like 4 years of my prison sentence were like, and then 25 from now to now, like me being 40, it was like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just starts changing for whatever reason. And then when you get to the 40 realm, I'm seeing now like like the Prophet Islam talked about the like the maturity level, right? Coming to that, like it's hard. Like there's certain things that you've set in stone that if you're not careful, they're bad. They're hard to get rid of because it's just like so ingrained in you. You know what I mean? And so you see that dua of 40, right? When you come to that maturity, because there's something there that just happens with the spiritual intellect. It just happens, and you can feel it. You can feel the shift because you can kind of bring all of your life from this one side. Let's say it's split like this, right? So you just feel that experiential knowledge, and now you're able to place it and actually articulate it now. Like it's not just a feeling, it's actually now there's an articulation that people can understand, and you can make them feel that too if you utilize that ability. It's just something that's there. Like I don't know how to really completely explain it, but you know it. Like, and it's now you have this deeper wisdom of understanding and having rahmah. Like before, when you were younger, you'd be like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? You like question it like you're almost above it, but you don't really understand it. You know what I mean? And now you come to the point, now you have that understanding that people are on their journey. You know what I mean? And you either help facilitate it by introducing proper information that's going to help them realize certain things. And it's not maybe at that point, but you know it now. Like you're able to see, like a lot of times we get frustrated, right? When we give people information, they don't change, right away. Like we're like, well, you don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, but now you start having the wisdom, like they'll get it at some point, or maybe it's not their time for it. Like, and you're okay with that actually. And it doesn't like frustrate you or bother you or stop you from going on your path of trying to build or develop or whatever that you're doing in life, you know? So it's just those little subtleties that you start to really realize. And it's something that, like, the Prophet Islam mentions these things in amazing ways, you know? Like, the prophecy starts at this time, 39, 40. Like, there's reasons for all of these realities, you know what I mean? Of why his journey started at that time, because your maturity level, in a deep sense, begins to really sprout.
Yeah. So I'm curious on how you ended up where you're at, because you already started about what happens when you hit the age of like 30, 40. And I'm like, okay, we're already jumping to 30, 40. Let's start back when you were like 10 or 15.
You know?
But yeah, I guess the podcast started. So assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I've got Jesse Maroney on the podcast. Jesse's a community organizer who I have had the privilege of getting to know and learn from. And more than anything, understand him and other people by him in the last couple of years, even through our limited interactions. So he's been community organizing in Los Angeles for the last 8 years. Prior to that, you were based out of Connecticut. And yeah, today I'm kind of here to like talk about exactly what you were talking about like 2 minutes ago, which is how did you end up as who you are, and then currently what you're doing. So first and foremost, you were talking about like, you know, kind of piecing together things at the age of like 30, 40 and like later on in life, and understanding like what your place is and how you're able to put things together for yourself, not only then to benefit yourself, but also then to benefit others. But how did you get to the point to like even get those initial pieces? So like I want to take a revisit back to like, I don't know when things started for you. Maybe it was around 12, maybe it was around 15, maybe it was earlier than that. But when was the first like I guess inclination of understanding yourself as someone rather than just like a member of like a family or like, you know, like as a young kid, right? So like when did something kind of become your identity, and what was that thing? So I'm sure Islam will come into that play either early or later on, but what was your first identity? Like, do you remember?
Yeah, no, I do. Bismillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima kathira. I think those words, you know, when you start off something in the name of Allah, right? The first time that I remember really having some establishment maybe internally of self-identity that you have been maybe, I guess you would say, created from something, right? That there was something higher than just ourselves. I think it was I had to be probably like 6 years old, and I remember being under a tree. And I was under a tree, and when I was under the tree, I remember it was raining, right? This is in Connecticut, so it rains, especially it was like the summertime, so it was warm. So it rains sometimes twice a week, right? It's not like California. So, and it was under a pine tree in my house. It's actually cut down now at my father's house. And I remember just singing to God. It was a very interesting thing. But there was this recognition, or there was this understanding that was kind of imbued within me. Now, obviously, maybe fast forwarding to now, understanding that that was the fitrah, but I remember that placement. I remember that feeling that started to really move through my being, and that was something that was really powerful. Now that I really reflect upon life.
At 6 years old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at 6,
Yeah.
right? And so there was this consciousness that was there, right, and this reality and this understanding. But that was probably the first place of identity, right? Like, if I had to really go down into the deep essence of the soul of things. Mm-hmm. And that began to, help me move through life. So my first introduction, of life, especially when it came to manhood, was obviously my father, and he's a very interesting individual, right? He was born in 1945, grew up in segregation, in North Carolina, in Greenville, North Carolina. His father originally comes from South Carolina, which is from a family called the Neesmiths, which is very known for farm cultivation, growing tobacco, doing all these different things, but really coming from slavery. So they have this distinguishing factor that they're really good at that. And so it was this identity, though, of manhood. He's an alpha male, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And he was every bit of a strong man. So this kind of really gave me the first form of beginning to walk through life in that kind of following those footsteps, right? So if you had to take a look at that. The interesting thing about him, if we talk about like community development, then you can take the conversation where you want it to go. There's an interesting thing I think that probably gave me some skills and abilities later on in life. Is that I used to see him, he had a hauling business, right? So he used to go to people's houses, they wanted things taken away, okay. And he would actually go in, and he had a really good business, actually. He would work full-time, and then he would have that part-time. And be honest with you, probably if there wasn't as much racism when it came to the banking systems and stuff, that there was, especially at that time, he had a full-fledged business, a nice one. But there was a lot of economic barriers that probably couldn't be broken through that easily back then. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that he used to do, he used to take a lot of the guys that were in the city of Danbury, and they would be on the street and stuff like that, and he would pick them up and actually pay them well and have them come with him for the day. And he did that with many different people who had drug addictions and stuff like that, and I used to see him do that. And he would come home, he would bring them to the house, he would sit down, we'd have a meal, we get to introduce them. This was a common thing. And then when I was actually finally brought to North Carolina to meet his side of the family, right, to meet my grandfather and stuff like that when I was 7, I saw that culture in the area of where my grandfather had his farm, that they would do this. This was a normal process of trying to help uplift each other in a healthy black society.
Right.
So that's kind of, but the thing is that I saw that all the time, that my grandmother especially would bring people together. Mm. And it was something that was they didn't want to no matter the mistake that a person may make or the harm sometimes that would be inflicted upon us sometimes from individuals, you know what I mean? Not in really, I guess you would say, really intentional.
But the human aspect.
They would be bypassed, you know what I mean? And so that was the first identity of self was under the tree, but then also too of how to kind of, that tenderness and that care was that was my first introduction from my father, even though there was a lot of bruteness, you know what I mean? But that was something that I realized a lot. And I think sometimes we don't even recognize that inside of ourselves, what begins to spur us on to do some of these things. So
yeah. So the way you learned about people was basically by observing the way your father and your mother treated other individuals.
Yeah, my mother, that's a good point. My mother is, she was a intensive care nurse, right? So health was always a big thing. My father also too had hypertension. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my father also too had hypertension, and when we were younger, that was something that had to be monitored because he had extreme hypertension. Because I think it was just how his genetic makeup was now, knowing a little bit of stuff. They gave him medicine and stuff like that, and he didn't really take it all that great.
Right.
But it was something that was there, and but that led to monitoring food and what we did. And, you know, things we ate. Like I remember for the longest time, I didn't want any of my friends to come to my house because there was no salt in the food.
Right.
You know what I mean? I used to watch like one of my friends. He ate like the meat for the spaghetti, but not the spaghetti or the sauce. You know, because it had no flavor to it. So it's just interesting. But yeah, this is one of the things. And then also too on my mother's side, one thing that was really important to my grandfather for whatever reason that it may be. He was a Muslim, you know, wasn't even religious, but telling the truth was something that he just did. Don't know. It was great because you could trust him. You could count on him to be there. You count on him for time. You could count on him to tell you what the reality of things was. And that was a great blessing. And I think that from that, we could see a lot of different manifest blessings that happened in the household, period, when it came to provision, when it came to just continuity, when it came to understanding. There's a lot of things that Allah just put there that you could see, you know. But this is kind of the formation of who maybe I became. And then ultimately, when I begin to get introduced to Islam later on in my life, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. You know what I mean? Of like what needs to happen in the world and what we're here for, you know what I mean? So it just is very interesting how Allah puts little pieces of the puzzle together for you already, whether you realize it or not. And the more faster that you realize it, you know, the easier the journey becomes.
Yeah. So around what age did you start to get introduced? Because you did mention that you got introduced to Islam early on, like at the age of 6, you kind of had, or were you talking to God ambiguous?
No, just God in just general.
Okay.
God in general. Probably the first introduction to Islam was Spike Lee's Malcolm X.
What year was that? 19?
Yeah, that'd be in the 90s, early on.
Yeah, 1980s.
So I had to be, I don't know, maybe 10.
Yeah.
Maybe not. You know what I mean? Something at that point.
And exposed to like TV, television? Or
Yeah,
books?
Well, okay, we're going back a little farther. So this was when VHS was a thing.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? This
Before
is
my
when,
day.
yeah, this was exactly. That's what I mean. So this was when you're talking about when cable was a thing.
Yeah,
like cable was a big deal, and you had the extra purchase of like HBO and stuff like that. And that was you could pay the guy to come to your house. The guy would probably come to your house. Well, back then, anyways, and they'd be putting the cable together and be like, hey, give me an extra $60 and you get all the free channels. They did stuff like, that was a very interesting time. Yeah. But anyways, that was the first exposure. And my mom actually got me his autobiography because we watched the movie. It was very inspirational. It was very life-changing. And it was a very good movie at that time of depicting part of his journey. Now that I know more of it, it's okay. But at that point, it was good, you know? And it was interesting because I thought it was very, it was very inspirational about being in truth and just sticking up for what is right. You know what I mean? Getting a better understanding of things and even changing your position. Mm-hmm. You know, like that showed the whole evolution of Malcolm, rahimahullah. You know, so it's very it was very interesting to watch. And that was one of my first introductions. Now, I didn't really understand Orthodox Islam, and I think my father had some flirtations with Nation of Islam, just just in general, just with because it was a very powerful economic movement more than anything. The creed and everything like that, obviously, we know as Orthodox Muslims is very way off, but the camaraderie that was introduced into a community was very powerful. The economic awareness that was given to people who had once been enslaved not too long ago, or at least their ancestors, I should say, but they're coming out of that mindset was very powerful. You know what I mean? So this is something to, it was something that was infused inside of people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
you acknowledge that as well, and like.
No, you did. That was something that went into me. You know what I mean? Not the creed, because I never understood any of that, but just
the moral values.
The moral values of it, being proud of yourself.
Yeah.
Speaking up about it, the eloquence at that time that I thought that some of them, well, especially Malcolm, definitely did.
Yeah.
Farrakhan for me is a little bit different, quite different, to be honest with you. But when it comes to his speaking abilities. But it did give you something that, you can actually, no, what you're thinking is okay. You know what I mean? Like, what you're seeing is real, and, those type of things. So, because, where I came from, I was living in Fairfield County, Connecticut. And it was a very interesting thing for my mother and my father to be together. That's a whole nother story for them being black and white.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So my father's African American and my mother's white. And so that was, a fight in and of itself. Yeah. Right. That was even, my grandfather was so upset that, he didn't speak to my father for like 17 years, right? That was a big deal. And it wasn't until I got in trouble that actually Allah bridged them together, which was very good things, so. But again, the first introduction was that. Then later on, when I got in some trouble when I was about 17 years old, and I went to prison for about 3 years, or youth prison at that point. Then I came home, and I had a girlfriend that was going to Northeastern University in Boston. And I used to go up, and I used to always go visit her every weekend, and we would hang out. And then she had a Muslim roommate. And that was my first introduction because she was fasting for Ramadan. And it was interesting because it was, at the time, nobody knows her name, so I can talk about it. But she used to drink. She used to go out and hang out during, like the weeks and stuff like that. But then when Ramadan came, it completely changed. Yeah. I remember that thing because I used to be, they had wine, they had the house, they would invite us over. There was like this interaction, just normal, I guess you would say, non-Muslim interaction
Western
that we
life,
have. Western life, that's a better way to put it. Yeah. And you could see it. And she's from a foreign country, you know what I mean? She's coming over there to a, international university for business and other things that she's going to be doing. And she has a very well-established family, you know what I mean? So stuff like that. And, so having a little wine and stuff, maybe that is even normal within where she was living. But during Ramadan, it all changed. And then all of a sudden she's not eating or drinking. And then she was praying, and she had the hijab. I was like, it was this. So that was my introduction. I said, wow, that's really interesting. I remember one time she said, I'm making dua for you guys. And so after that, I got incarcerated again. And not too long after that, I became Muslim, which was very interesting. Yeah. So
Muslim in prison? Or?
In prison, yeah. That's when I took my shahada. Actually, I was sentenced to 9 years. And during probably like 18 months into that prison sentence is when I actually used to work out in the morning quite a bit. Okay. So how it is in many prisons, that's another story for another time. But there's actually like cell blocks, and there's you have a small 6x9 or 6x10 room that you stay in. So it's like a bathroom with two people. And what you do is there's a certain time frames when they open the door, and then they have like a common area, like a recreation area. That's what they call it. And so at the prison that I was at was actually like a good prison to be at. I finally got there. I was in some terrible ones for a while, and I finally got to this good prison where
there's such a thing as a good prison.
Well, yeah, that's what they say. But like in the terrible ones, I give you an example. Like we would come out an hour a day. Okay. So you get out of your cell like 1 hour a day, or maybe 2, maybe. Right. And then you go outside maybe twice a week. Right. So, and then when it became wintertime, you didn't go out at all. So for 6 months out of the year, you went out maybe twice a week, out to just get some sun. Yeah. Right.
So now you got to the good prison.
I finally got to this good prison, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. So let me take advantage of it. Like I get up in the morning, I was cool. I was like, okay, I'm going to go out. I'm going to do some pull-ups on the stairs. It's like whole routines that we go through. And then what I had was Ohio University courses that were correspondence courses that I actually had taken a little bit of money that I still had saved from my great street entrepreneurial days. Yeah. And I said, okay, I'm going to actually study because obviously, crime has not really paid me that well. You know what I mean? So let me try to figure out something else. And I used to study in the morning, and the Muslims would be out in the morning reading the Quran. And they were all like, black brothers who I'm seeing that are like reading Arabic. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. These, a couple of them got kufis on, and, they're on Aleph Bata, and, all these different things. Like, I didn't understand any of it. They're trying to do Ayn, and you hear all these different things. And
they would see me coming out all the time, and then a couple of them just, hey, what's your name? Where you from? What you doing? This is interesting. They would see that, you seem like you're pretty smart. You know what I mean? And then they would just ask different questions. Someone would just work out. We became cool. And little by little, they just asked me, what do you believe in? Like, do you have a belief in this and that, da, da, da. And I remember they asked me a question about Isa alayhi salam. What do you believe about Jesus? And I was like, well, it seems from the Bible like he's a messenger of God. You know what I mean? Like that's what it seemed, And so because they were interested, they were kind of amazed I came to that conclusion and not saying about the Son of God. And that was the conclusion that I came to, So it was interesting. And so after that, then one of them gave me a Quran. He gave me like the Noble Quran. And it was just too much commentary. I couldn't really understand it. I couldn't follow it. So then they just gave me Yusuf Ali. And I remember I read it from the beginning to the end. And when I read it from the beginning to the end, I remember crying at the end. I said, this just makes too much sense. Because in the beginning, obviously, after Fatiha, it says, that this is a book that there is no doubt for those who want to be guided, right? For the muttaqin, or for the people who want to be conscious of Allah, right?
Did you feel that same feeling that you had when you were 6 underneath the tree? Or was it a different?
Yeah. That's a good question. That's a great question. Yeah, and something different, like added on, like clarity. Do you know what I mean? Because I had at that time, I had a Rastafarian cellmate. And the interesting thing about the Rastafarians is that they prostrate, right? So the actual,
as a part of what, like
they pray. Okay. They pray in the same, they pray in the morning and night. Okay. They're imitating some of the biblical aspects, right?
Right.
And they have a prostration that they do. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have all the movements. And if you take a look at the Orthodox Christians, there's actually some viral videos going around now. Their movements are very similar to Islam. So it was interesting because that was the first thing of prostration like that. I was like, okay. It was like clarification, right. Like, you know what I mean? It was like Allah showing me that. And then, then we had the form of the prayer, and that began to be something that not only did I find fulfillment in, but then I was able to watch like actually du'as become manifest.
Right.
Like I give you one example, and we can go to other aspects of what you think that is you can pick apart from the story. But I remember one time I was on the phone with my mother in prison, and my father was sick. My father had, I think his appendix burst, a couple other things. My father had a lot of stuff going on with him at the end of his life. But in that time, there was a couple things going on, like his kidney. He was on dialysis for about 25 years and a lot of different things. So there was a lot of complexities. And sometimes, especially when the insurance used to roll over, like alhamdulillah, he had a good job that gave him a good pension and gave him good insurance. But it would be rollover points that would be financially hard. For anybody who goes through any of these medical procedures or these situations, understands sometimes insurances can be very complicated. Mm-hmm. And so I remember her, she was stressing a lot. And I remember she was just in a fit, of like, man, this is financially hard. We don't have some of the money. And she's very skilled. She used to work part-time to just take care of me, So now she's trying to figure things out. So long story short, what ends up happening, I remember going back to cell very worried. I just made dua. I remember literally the next week, she was like, I have so much overtime, I can't take it all. And just watching that ease come into my life, just of like how that was. And especially at that time, they were paying double time and time and a half. So she was making like $150 an hour. You know what I mean? So I watched that like actually happen and then put ease into the situation. And then I watched also too, just in general, like a lot of the questions of my life become answered by just the study of Islam. Yeah. I remember just it happening by just reading a basic fiqh book like The Reliance of the Traveler and the Dependence behind it. I went through it piece by piece about understanding why revelation is actually necessary in our lives. What's some of the internal and external meanings behind some of the acts that we do, just like wudu, what it means about the prayer and all these different things, just that unraveled for me a lot of questions, right? Just made clear for me a lot of things, but also too gave me a lot of different purpose and understanding of, like what's going on around us, but also to the purpose of what we're here for.
You saw all this within your time at prison?
Oh, yeah.
And how many years was that?
That was 7.5.
So 7.5 for the time you were in prison, and what part of that was when you got introduce and
Oh, okay. So altogether in my life, I was in prison for 10 years. So
Right.
just to be clear, I was in prison for 10 years. The first prison sentence that I was from 17 to about 20 years old, right? And that was no introduction of Islam.
Yeah.
None at all, because it was just a bunch of young guys, just with the craziest ideas in the world. The second one, probably on, let's say, out of 10 years, let's say 6 was as a Muslim. So 60% of it was as a Muslim. Let's say about that.
Within those 6 years, you started from like scratch to
Started from scratch. Started from complete scratch. So it was autodidact for a good portion of my time. I got purification of the soul from Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. Different things that were available by cassette. Remember, this is cassette. Couple CDs too as well. But a lot of it was actually just reading and trying to begin to understand, right? So I read a lot of books from like traditional scholars, you know what I mean? Like that had good translations, like Imam Ghazali and many others as well. Do you know what I mean? But one of the things that I tried to understand is, Islam from the lens of obviously the four madhab, you know what I mean? One of the schools of Aqidah. And then also too, when it came to tasawwuf or ihsan, you know what I mean? The science of that reality, right? So I always tried to go with traditional people because there was a lot of confusion, especially when it came to self-teaching.
Yeah.
You can get into some very problematic things that I've seen that because the ego loves to rear its head, you know what I mean? And that, especially in those arenas, it becomes very problematic because people want to judge very quickly. They're not understanding certain things. They said, but this said this, and they don't get a commentary on some of the particulars. And, so you become very literal. And not only that, you don't understand, so it's just the nature of the place. But alhamdulillah, I was actually very blessed not to have to go through that because of just actually reading and getting to really understand the in-depth stuff and reading.
And also experiencing, because you did say like you saw du'as being manifested, right? So by experience, you solidified your faith without saying, because anyone who thinks they know something knows nothing whatsoever. So like,
you're right.
Your experience definitely, what I'm hearing is also played a part because that solidified the way you felt about Islam. Because Islam's not just about knowing things, but you were, all you had was books and you had feelings.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point about knowing, right? So being one of the arifin is what we aspire to be, right? The ones with experiential knowledge, right? There's a difference between, a lot of people have intellectual knowledge, but then the experiential knowledge to be able to be kind of sit in it and see that reality. Like you said, with the du'as, that was something to, Allah Azza wa Jal really increased my faith in that reality, to not only see the du'as, but then see also too, just in general, like I was talking to my cousin the other day, and he was like, man, you were really like a gremlin. You were like a beast at one point in your life, and this has completely changed you. You know what I mean? So it's just, it's just watching the evolution of yourself, it's really powerful. So, but that was the introductory, like from that time, the brothers actually with their character. And then some of the guys who I knew, like, were like completely changed. You went from a stone cold killer to somebody who would cry in the cell at night. Thinking about, it's like, you watch these things, you watch real things happen, like people really mitigate somebody possibly getting killed to actually them shaking hands. Like I watched that stuff. I watched these things. I watched 2 individuals that on the street were trying to kill each other, actually hold hands together and say, we're going to rebuild our community. I watched those things. So this is not a joke, and I watched the reality of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ unfold. So it's powerful to watch.
They were just as torn.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like when those things start happening, I said, man, this is something. This is Allah driving us, right? And you start to really realize that. Then you start to feel it. So it's something really powerful.
So at what age did you? So now we're 10 years sentence, second time around, and you came out and you were around what age?
Oh, that's good. I was around, how old was I? About 28 going on to 29.
Okay. So we're getting closer to the time period where you're like starting to figure things out as per the beginning of the conversation.
Okay, yeah. So now I'm figuring things out. So the first introduction was, just coming out of prison, right? And so now this is my first time going into a mosque, right? So that's the first place starting it. So,
all right, there's no mosque in prison.
Yeah,
of course not.
You know what I mean?
My bad. The things I take for granted.
Yeah, I know. God. That's what I tell you. So, like, even the other day, it was interesting because at the Jummah, when I was, I think I was mentioning the brother Sahi. He just got out of doing about 17 years. It's his first time in the masjid. He's been a Muslim for 10 years or whatever, but it's the first time actually in the masjid. Like, we take these things for granted sometimes. It's like it's a big deal, you know, especially the one where I went to, the first one. I remember I got home, and one of the biggest things, I never forget it. I went to a halfway house, and you come with so much institutionalized realities within you. Like, they're just from being in prison. Like, you know, you have to be hard. You have to be very direct with the administration, because if not, they'll take over you. They'll put you through the ringer a lot of times. There's certain things you have to hold your ground with, right? And so I remember I came in, I'm like, I'm going to Juma, you know what I mean? Like, because that was a big deal, like, to actually establish your prayer, not just individually, but like we're going to pray on Friday, because a lot of institutions would completely block you from that. They would do everything in their power to not enact that right. They would do it, especially when it was 2007, 2008, and all those things were going on, especially with the growth of ISIS and all that. They did so many things, man, I could tell you about. But so now I'm home. I'm like, look, I got to establish my prayer. And I remember one of the first brothers I saw was actually, he was on a yard with me, and his name was Mikayo. And he was like, Assalamu alaikum. And I'm like, hey, alaikum assalam. You know, and I remember he sat me down. He said, look, he said, I understand your frustration, because we were frustrated, and we ended up getting a job together at a demolition company. I ended up becoming a supervisor. It was a whole interesting thing. But I remember him sitting down. It's like, look, we're out here in the world now, and I understand your frustration, but we have to think about different ways of doing this. It's not just going to be, we can't just be so uptight and so forceful in these ways. We're going to think of unique ways. I remember then that snapped something into me. You know what I mean? Think about, you've actually been incarcerated, man. You were actually really in a place it's not a normal situation. Yeah. You know, and I didn't really think about that. You know, it's not normal for you to be in a room for so long without any guidance. It's not normal for you to be in the same clothes and with the same colors around you to kind of completely wash away your identity. Right. You know, it's not really normal for you to be just identified as a number. Yeah. Or have an institutional body of individuals who sit above you and control your every action. Yeah. Right. So I was like, oh, you were a slave. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like you were for lack of a better word. Yeah, you were a slave, and you know that was your situation, and you know, alhamdulillah, came out of it with a clear mind, but you had to really understand these subtleties. It's also to, you know, like even still now when you you know, if you've ever been incarcerated and you go in a room, you have hypervigilance. Like when you go in a room, like I look at people's pockets, I look at things that I won't tell nobody, but I analyze the room for danger off the rip. You know what I mean? And that you'll get that, especially when you first come out of prison. You're very hypervigilant, like just because of the tension that you live in so much. You know what I mean? Because violence is, like my friend Tobias says, violence is the currency. It's real. So I come home and want to go to Juma. So, okay, 1 week goes by, we get the job. Well, I go with some local brothers to the first Juma. It was nice. It was in Norwalk, Connecticut. There's a small little, actually, church that they were renting out just for the Juma. So we would pray there. Then, okay, I get a job. Finally, a call comes to the halfway house, and they're like, we need 20 people for jobs. You know, they're just doing like a construction site. So they're probably the guys going to work for 2 or 3 weeks, and, you know, they'll pick through some or whatever. So we all go out there. We're all getting rid of the debris. We're breaking things down, stuff like that. And we get picked for the job, right? So the first week, because of travel, we had to travel on the train, we had to walk like 5 miles. It was a lot to get to that job site, but it was great. And we didn't go to Juma. And then finally, I called my mom, because we're in Connecticut. She's not too far. I was like, look, if you want to come on a lunch break, you can come see me. And then just, can you drive us down to Juma, me and my friend Mike, because we're the only 2 Muslims there. And so that was the first real Juma in the masjid. It was in Stamford. And alhamdulillah, I've seen that sheikh quite a few times at different events now. But that was the first introduction to like at a masjid. You know, I was like, wow. I was like, wow, this is very amazing. And it was interesting because they had he couldn't speak English, but they had somebody translating.
Okay.
So they had the ear mics, you know. So this was all like new to me. I thought this was kind of cool,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So that was the first thing. But once I got out of that situation, I went into, which really was my first introductory into like a community. I would say now, because that's the masjid experience, now real community. Was in Danbury/Newtown, Connecticut. So now my parents live in Bethel, which is a small little town, but here's the city, Danbury, and then Newtown, right next to each other. It's all pretty much all the same. It's not even different. And my first experience was actually at a Bangladeshi masjid, Beit al-Mukarram. So that was interesting because it was the hottest Ramadan that I ever had. What I mean by that is that the food was so spicy. the food was so spicy because this was my first introduction to like other cuisine, and that's one of the things that I always credit about being a part of the Ummah is that you'll begin to experience the world just through food.
Yeah, it's a diverse place.
It was beautiful, and so I'm like, man, this is so good. Like the goat was all, you know, because I'm, you know, from a black culture, right? So African American culture. And gravy is a good thing. You know what I mean? Gravy and biscuits. So they had gravy with the goat. And I'm like, oh, this is good, cool. And it was tasting amazing. I'm like, man, this is so good. And then it started to burn so bad. And I remember just pouring sweat during Tartawi, my first Ramadan. Like, yeah, because it was not too far after I had gotten out of the halfway house that it was actually Ramadan. And so I'm pouring sweat, man. I'm like, whew. And then the uncle shuts off the fan. I mean, like, man, I was dying in there, but it was a great experience. And then finally, one of the brothers was like, hey, look, there's another masjid that's in Newtown. You should actually go there. It's called El Hidayah, and there's actually like some other converts too as well. You know what I mean? So you might, get a little bit better of a mixture over there. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I looked for it one night, couldn't find it, and then finally, I was walking at a grocery store near my house, my parents' house, just to say, and there was a Muslim sister, and so I said, "Hey, assalamu alaikum," because it's not like here, like where they're everywhere. You know what I mean? I was like, "Hey, can I help take your bags, take it to the car?" I'm trying to be nice. She's an older sister, she's probably in her maybe 50s, 60s, or whatever, and so I'm like, "Hey, look, I'll take your bags and this and that." I'm just proud to be Muslim and see a Muslim,
Yeah.
so. And she's like, hey, you should really go to El Hidayah. I know Brother John. And so she gave me the contact information of the brothers who were praying Fajr there.
Right.
And that's how that kind of all started. And so what ended up happening from that, then I think they probably saw my size. Like, hey, can you do some of the physical things around here? Like cut the tree down and stuff like that. And could you help out with some of the things? And I was like, yeah, okay, I can clean up. I can do some stuff. And then one of my neighbors was up the road, found out he was a Muslim, and he was actually giving some of the khutbah there because it was a small community. Maybe 15 people were coming for Jummah at that time. And then me and him were talking. He was like, you should actually give the speech. I was like, I don't know about if I really want to, you know what I mean, whatever situation is. And so I did it. And then the sister said, can you do it consistently? Can
that
you
was
do
your first khutbah?
That was my first khutbah in El Hidayah, outside of prison. Prison gave one some. And then she was like, hey, can you help out with some of the youth? And I was like, yeah, okay, I can talk to some of the young kids and stuff like that. So I used to talk to them, just introduce them to certain things and talk about something. Then I would talk about sensitive subjects too with some of the older ones, like porn, stuff like that they would get.
We should be talking about. There will be episodes on that later on. Like,
okay, gotcha.
We're not tabooed about that.
So yeah, exactly. So I talked about things like that, and I remember it was a couple interesting responses from the community. Right. So think about it. It's like 2013. Immigrant community or immigrant families or parents that have come over here that have some quote unquote made it because it's a good area.
Yes. It's America.
And yeah, exactly. And so now this is like sensitive and like, what are you talking about? And I remember talking about like holidays and just some of the significance because of Thanksgiving, not to say, whatever that people do. But just what was the reality of it? Like, so we understand kind of where we're at because sometimes things can be sugar coated out here. You know what I mean? And I remember that. I remember, some of the parents came up like, Brother Jesse, you're talking to us like, we don't know how to raise our children. And I said, no, I don't really mean it like that, but I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit of stuff about like, now that they're getting introduced to Facebook, other things are evolving. Remember, there's a lot of things that go on with some of this. So be aware, and they don't think that it's all just cool. And I remember about 4 months later coming up to me, Brother Jesse, it's a disaster. Can you tell us what to do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they just didn't understand the culture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And no matter what time frame it may be in, the Western culture has its footprint on certain things, and there's just a certain way that it moves.
Yeah.
It just doesn't move differently. It's just what it is. It's going to exploit because that's capitalism. It's going to do certain things. So you have to be careful of how you move with it. So I was just trying to make them aware of it. And it was very interesting. But that was the first part of really beginning the process of community development.
Right. So I do want to touch on one thing, because you were mentioning earlier that when Mikhail was telling you that you're in the real world now, that we have to do things a bit differently, right? But now you're explaining a part of your life where parents are coming to you and being like, "Oh, things are hitting the fan. What do we do?" Right?
Yeah.
So it's like you clearly now were talking or behaving in a way that other people are viewing you almost as like someone they can like talk to and view.
Yeah.
So there's the softness that was brought back, or maybe from what Mikhail was saying, it's like a way. How quickly did you adapt to that? Because it seems like it was fast.
No. So it's interesting because it's like a diamond in the rough.
Right.
Right? Is that the essence of the coal, or the material of the coal in and of itself, will produce a diamond put under certain circumstances.
Sure.
Right? So what's interesting is that those abilities or those awarenesses are there even when I came out, probably even from the first situation of meeting Mikhail, right? One of the things that it gave me an understanding was, I give an example. I remember I was walking to a bus stop, and I'm like, hello, talking to people, because I'm still in 2005 mind, right? Where you got the Nextel here.
Yeah.
It doesn't invade your whole reality.
Yeah.
You can't open it up and start looking and scrolling and reading your own paper, all that type of stuff, right? So I'm still talking to people and saying, man, the communication with people is not the same here.
Yeah.
I noticed that right off the rip. I was like, people can't hold a conversation the same. It's not the same. And then I remember I seen a guy talking, and I'm like, is he all right, man? Is he a little crazy? And he's got a Bluetooth on. He's talking to the phone because I couldn't see the other side. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. So the reason why I'm saying that is because noticing some of those particulars, especially through sensory deprivation, you begin to actually realize things. That's why if you take a look at the Prophet Islam and any of the great awliya and stuff, they did khalwa, right? Because that intense dhikr and beginning to properly, when properly done, not because you can go crazy too as well, but when properly done, it gives you a great level of perception. And so even in those situations of the transformation, when I just little by little began to get introduced a little bit just to society and the movements of it, because it's all pretty much the same. There still was refinement that even in that time when I was making those khutbahs, those sermons, even with inside of those times, there was still refinement that I had to do, right? But there was still an understanding that was there as well. Just from, like, one of the things that I noticed is that, like, the pursuit of knowledge is not the same anymore, right? Like, even from the late 90s to the early 2000s, it's not the same. So when you don't have the foundational information, at least, to begin to process things, that begins to be a problem. And I see that with a lot of our community, right? So, but that process, to give you a time frame, maybe took about a year or so to kind of like, and there's still things I have to unravel from just being institutionalized, you know what I mean? But the more exposure to community, the more that it begins to come off you.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay, so you exited this this masjid. Actually, not exited. So I guess we were at the point where, because I do want to eventually end up like where you're at now, right?
Gotcha.
And
No,
there's a
there.
way to get from Connecticut to LA. It's a long ways off.
Okay.
Right. So you're involved in this first community.
I'll tell you. So what happened was, I'm involved in this community. It's growing, developing. Everything's cool. Alhamdulillah. I got married at one point, and everything's going well. Alhamdulillah. And then a couple of different things changed with my relationship. Got divorced. That did happen. And then I'm like, okay. My intention was to go and pursue knowledge, to go study Islam at some level. This has been one of the things I've been trying to do even till now, right? And one of the things that I started looking at is, okay, how am I going to do this, right? And so one of the things about, how Allah strengthens your faith, I was still on probation. And I'm like, ya Allah, I'm going to be 35 when I get off of this. Like, then try to like go and study someplace and do this. And, how am I going to do this? And then, how is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? You start asking yourself, and then you just say, ya Allah, you definitely know best and you know my intention. Then literally probably not too long after that, one of the probation officer comes to me and says, hey, Mr. Maroney, I was looking over your case and I think you've been missentenced. I think there's a problem in your case. And I said, what? Because I had a quote unquote really good lawyer, back in the entrepreneurial days. And it was interesting because she said, no, I think you have actually a solid case. I'm going to bring it in front of your prosecutor and I think we're going to get your probation nullified. I was like, hey, please do it. And so we went to court. I remember my old lawyer called and it was like, I looked over the case. I don't think they're right. Da, da, da. He thought he gave a whole spiel about, probably the mistake that he made, but that's another story.
Right.
But yeah, I went to court. They said, yeah, Mr. Maroney, you're free and clear. Have a good day, sir. And that was it. So that was interesting because now I can actually leave the state without asking anybody.
And that was big for you too.
That was huge. So now that shifts the conscience. Yeah. Right? And so I'm like, okay, what do I do? And then I gave a speech. So this is really what did it. I gave a speech at one of the Beit al-Mukarram, the same place I first went. They had what they call a program called Pathway to Jannah. And it was like their first introduction to that program now. Now they've brought like Ustad Hassan Al-Wan and many others out many times now. But I gave a speech about my conversion to Islam, right? Like kind of like we talked about, but in a different way. And then I talked about just some of the influential figures and talked about a dream that I had with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, right? And, getting to understand the Prophet of Islam and seeing the Prophet of Islam in a dream and how that changed my life, right? Stuff like that, other things. And so after that, I think my friend had sent him that video and then Sheikh Hamza called me. I was like, hey, I saw your video. I'm sorry, I don't get around to my email. So that was a big deal for me at that time. And he was like, I think you should really come to Zaytuna. So I was like, okay, cool. I'll do that. And I didn't tell him. I actually just literally packed my stuff, took some advice from my friend. He was like, you should go to Orange County at the Islamic Institute of Orange County. Go to this place called the College of Islamic Studies that Sheikh Mustafa is doing right now at the masjid. And just get yourself like, just a little bit refreshed on just academics and stuff. Because I had been out for about 3 years or so. Right. I said, okay, cool, I'll do that. So I just packed all my stuff and just literally went in my car, packed probably what I could fit in my trunk and just lived at a campsite here. Just drove out here.
Oh, you drove here?
Drove the country, right? So it was the first time driving the whole country.
Yeah.
So it was amazing, right? I'm like in this little Subaru Forester.
All right.
And I'm like, okay, I found free campsites on Google search. That was my first early days of just searching on the web, right? And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm just going to stay right there. And I'm like, oh, it's not that far. It was like 45 miles from where I needed to go. But I'm like, okay, it's not that far in my mind, not knowing LA traffic and all those other things. Yeah. And I remember that I got there and that was an amazing ride, man. Just going down through the Rocky Mountain and all those different things and coming down and then finally getting to the campsite. And so I had bought a tent that I had set up at my house already, so I knew how to do it really quickly. Went down there and just set up the spot. And then I would come up twice a week from the campsite to go to the classes. And that was my first, like actually coming into a bigger Islamic community. That was my first like introduction to the Islamic Institute of Orange County. And so they knew that I was coming. They tried to, I guess you would say, understand. I think this was very odd for them as a community that some man would actually come and just do this at this age. And who is this? Is he crazy? You know what I mean? Those type of things. And it's very understandable. But it was great for me because it was my first time in my life, like out completely, like on my own in a different place. Yeah. And it developed a level of trust and dependency that was really great to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you're in the campsite and it takes you about 20 minutes to get out of there. You know what I mean? And so you have to really plan your stuff really well, sit down there, and then if you're going to come out, you're going to come out. And then, it's a whole process, right, of just preparation.
Is this the first time you felt like really purposeful about what you're doing? Or do you think that came earlier, back when you were in Connecticut and working for the masjid?
Say it again one more time?
Like when it comes to like purpose.
Oh, purpose,
right?
okay, yeah.
Do you feel like this is a time that you were like, there's a difference between feeling like I am doing purposeful work and saying like, and walking and waking with purpose. Like,
yeah, I mean, it was real at this point.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it was like, I'm out here. I don't know anybody.
I'm doing it.
This is real. I'm just walking with that, right? And then one of the first things was actually like, I remember one of the times I came back from class and it was in the middle of the night. I got back at like 11:30. There's no lights down there.
Yeah, it's a campsite.
Yeah, so you got to like, and it's in La Cañada. I think that's how you say it, Flint Ridge.
Yeah.
So it's on the mountain, but you got to go down.
Yeah.
Right, and so you got to go down, and it's not like a little down, and it's like completely black, right? And so I remember the guy was like, one of the guy was like, "Hey, just be careful of the mountain lions," you know what I mean? Like, and so I was like, "Nah, Bismillah, we're just gonna walk," right? Yeah. And so that was something really profound, and there was a really profound moment that happened. Another thing, I remember, it had to be like 100 and some degrees. And I'm walking up the mountain. I got to go someplace. I forgot where it was. And I remember my friend, for whatever reason, Allah had made my friend start calling everybody. He was very, very upset that the Muslim community wasn't being like hospitable, right? That they hadn't found a place to stay. This is the person seeking knowledge. This is some of the things that's got me into community development, right? So, and it was just something new for everybody. Everybody, this is the Orange County experience. So everybody's kind of well-to-do, stuff like that. So it's a different situation than what they would, maybe another community, how they would respond, which now that I understand the psychology of the community, you know what I mean? So, but anyways, my friend was calling everybody. I mean, he was going crazy calling everyone, like calling all the shuyukh and it's just stuff. I didn't know any of these people at this time. So they're like, what is this? Who is this? Da, 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 da. And finally, he got in contact with a brother who had a zawiya, like a third space at that time, named Abdullah Haroon. He had the zawiya with the zawiya experience, right? No, it was a zawiya. Zawiya perspective. That was the name of it. So, anyways, he got in contact with him and was like, look, I got some really good news. This is somebody who studied with some of the shuyukh that you want to study with. He's from the Bay, Go see him in Santa Ana. And I remember that going there, and then he was like, look, you can just sleep here on the floor and just take care of the place, and you can have a good sleep. And it was only 15 minutes away from where I had to go to the classes. So that like was a huge relief on me and just completely changed everything. And that's when, after that, just things started to develop. So I'll let you maybe ask a question or two.
Yeah. So
because I'm pretty sure there's probably one or two.
Got to the point where you're taking these classes in. Is this ISOC, by the way? Like
No. This is Islamic Institute of Orange County.
Is that still around?
That's in State College.
Okay.
That's State College in Anaheim.
Right. And then your goal was to basically, eventually, from what I can see and what I know about you as well, was to like get in touch with like Hamza Yusuf and Zaytuna, because you did come to California for that.
That was the original purpose. And so what ended up happening was I started taking some classes at the Islamic Institute of Orange County or the College of Islamic Studies at that time. That turned into the California Islamic University for some point. And so I was taking classes with that, just trying to get like the basics of Sirah, Fiqh 101. Because you remember, I've never taken a class like actually formally, except for like intensives when I was actually back home. But I'd never taken like a formal class, except for stuff that was online, like in person. So it was kind of a cool experience. That's the experience that I wanted, right?
Yeah.
And just to get in the mode of actually getting prepared to go to Zaytuna. Like, I'd never gone to college before. I'd never gone to university. So like, I remember my time frames are all off. Like I'm like 30 years old, 31, you know what I mean? So it's just completely different. So yeah, I came over here for that, to get prepared to go to Zaytuna. And now things started to actually shift. So what happened was, took the classes, then I finally, I'm going to apply for Zaytuna. I'm just going to apply, get accepted, and just show up and be like, Sheikh Hamza, I'm here, right? So that was kind of my mindset. And I applied, and I had gotten all my transcripts. I had the credits to get ready to go that could be transferred, all that stuff. And I applied, and they denied me. That was a funny thing. Now, what was interesting in some of that was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes we have to take a look at the subtle signs. There was a brother that's from this community here in Los Angeles that was going, and he came to me and he was like, I don't think you should come. Yeah, he said that to me. I never forget it. And he's the one, I credit him all the time, Brother Tariq, changed my life because he said, I think you're a little bit beyond this. And I didn't really understand what it was meaning, but it was not just beyond or whatever that may be, whatever Allah made him say to get the push, was that you're going to meet some other people. Like you have a little bit of different of a path. You know what I mean? And sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal does that to you. You know what I mean? Makes you come to a certain place for a certain thing that you think, or you have it in your mind that you're going to go for this, and Allah does as He wills. And so what ended up happening, I took some of these courses there and then started just little by little. They had a prison outreach program that my friend, who had actually introduced me to Sheikh Mustafa Umar and IOC and all that, he actually started the infancy of it. He used to actually just go to the local jails and visit some of the guys there. Right. And they called it Link Outside at that time, right? Which is now what we're co-founded and what we've done. So he was like, look, I was doing that over there for a little while. My friend Amin still does it. Maybe you can link up with him and do that. So Amin E-Shaker is one of the co-founders too of what we have now. So, he came to me with like a little, like a letter. It was like, hey, we got this letter from jail. Can you maybe answer it? You know what I mean? Maybe this and that, I was like, okay, cool. He's like, would you want to do some prison visits? I'm like, yeah, why not? I would do something. I think I can get cleared now. And so I started doing visits, and then all of a sudden I found myself doing visits across the state. And I started seeing that there was a huge neglect of this portion of the community. Like we have all this plethora of resources here, but we're not utilizing any of our resources, and it doesn't need to be a lot to actually help out these individuals. So that was going on, and at the same time, Sheikh Mustafa Umar was actually putting together a bunch of people to actually give khutbah in different masajid around the state. Yeah. Right? Like, because he was like, hey, look, we have a bunch of places that need good speakers, but we don't have any good ones. Yeah. And so we went through the class, and it was like all these individuals now that some of these that are actually like shuyukh at different institutions and stuff. Now this was all kind of like a while ago. This is, it's close to almost 8 years ago. So we went through that process, and he was like, hey, look, I kind of want you to go to some of these different places. I like went Rancho Cucamonga. I went so many places, right? And I started seeing that not only is there actually a neglect not only on the prison population, but just some of our own portions of our communities, individuals in our community. Right. You know what I mean? About not just their needs or anything, but just being aware of them. You know what I mean? That we have these unique individuals that have unique, I wouldn't even say unique needs, just neglected needs. Yeah. You know what I mean? And this was actually something that was being mirrored in the community, and that we have a very cliquish mentality sometimes, right? And it's destructive. You know what I mean? Destructive to the overall growth of our community and the overall healthiness of our community, So that kind of made me see that. And then also too that the type of messages that were being presented on the minbars were cool. We could do better. Yeah. You know what I mean?
They were lacking the same connection that would allow people to feel connected.
Connections. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because that's the biggest thing is that, somebody said it the other day, is that we have crowds, not communities. Yeah.
You're basically sitting there and you're watching someone talk. You're not sitting there and connecting with someone on the minbar. So afterwards, you talk to them and you
exactly
actually have a conversation.
And then actually do something outside of just that. Yes. Just like you said, like even the hikes or whatever, that you're just doing something outside of that to actually develop connection. Like you actually know this person, maybe you know their family. Yeah. You know what they're good at, what they struggle with. That's a real community. You know what I mean? So I started seeing some of that. And so what was the interesting thing is that little by little, as I began to do some of the prison visits and a couple other things, more letters started coming in. And so now it pushed us to begin to respond to some of these situations. You know what I mean? Just general questions about like, hey, should I follow a school of thought? Hey, my mom is a non-Muslim and she's saying this to me. How should I respond? I mean, just general questions that happen. And what ended up happening was not only was there more responses that began to happen that we responded, but we started actively doing things to the small contact list that we ended up having, like sending them a newsletter, sending them some, just information to cheer them up. Started doing things like this nature, and I mean things of this nature, but also too then in the prison visits, I would do like twice a week. I'd actually hold a formal class in Lancaster. And so we would hold a formal class, and it was on just the beginning to understand the practical implementation of theology, right? That's just practical implementation about what we believe in. And that's kind of where we started with. And then we started with just 3 dimensions: tawbah, istiqamah, and hakika, right? So basically just repentance. We call that reformative justice, right? Or just what they call just like becoming justful to the self, like recognition, right? Then istiqamah is now character development,
Right.
And then coming to complete realization, seeing the unity kind of within all things, right? So this is like standard stuff when it comes to spiritual development. But we put that, and then how do we bridge that, or how do we actually how is that seen within what we believe in, period? That's a reality, right? And so we began to do that and started seeing huge changes in individuals. You know what I mean? And not only that, what's interesting now is like the class that I started with in that prison, most of them had life without parole sentences, and now they're all here home. That was really amazing. Like it was really like just destiny kind of playing out. Like I was supposed to be there to meet them, and now we're still on this journey together. Like it's a very interesting. So, but this gave me the bridge because now I understood. Okay, these individuals, how are they going to come back into the community? So let's pretend, because some of them some of the individuals have been incarcerated for 28 years.
Yeah, from a very young age. So,
you know what I mean? So now it's a whole new understanding of life, and how do and then what gifts are they going to bring? Because a lot of these people have done deep levels of introspection. And that's the thing that our community lacks. We haven't done deep levels of introspection.
It's a terrible way of putting it, but even when the Prophet wanted revelation, when he was given revelation, where was he? Right, he was alone. In a place of seclusion. And when even our sheikhs, as a college student, they tell us when we're feeling overstimulated or what should we do? They're like, take a hike, visit the grave, do things that place you in a very secluded place that allow you to reflect and think in a very meaningful way.
Exactly.
And you're talking about people right now who have spent 20 years in, like you were saying, a 6x9 prison cell with nothing but themselves, right? And it's there's only so much that you will talk to your cellmate, or if you have a cellmate, and even if you get along with them or not, right? So it's I mean, I just wanted to touch on this because it's getting to the point where we're finally at that part of the conversation where I think we're at what are you doing now? And I think it's important because this is the kind of thing that I think most of us, not us, most Muslims, at least from my community, lack is the ability to remove yourself, is the ability to understand. To say you have privilege is one thing, but to understand you have privilege is another thing, right? So
that's a good point.
Now, diving into that part is, what do these people bring? What do people? And I hate saying these people because it's they're not any different than the other person.
No.
The main difference is just their circumstance and environment. And it sucks that we even view that environment as a different environment. That's what sets the divide in the first place. It's they were in prison.
I think also too, one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran many times is gardens. Right, not just about the Garden of Jannah, but just in general, right?
The sense of cultivation of it,
Yeah, right. But also too, when you take a look at a healthy garden, is all the plants are interconnected, right? You see that with permaculture and all those different types of gardening. But a lot of times, natural, especially when you see the natural settings of how things grow, there's this beautiful level of how everything's different but interconnected and speaking. Like the garden speaks, right?
Yeah.
They have root systems that speak to each other. There's certain fragrances that the plants give off to tell other ones, like, hey, look, chill, this is not cool. Like, especially when it comes to pines. Like, when they're sick, they're able to, through their root system, talk to the other ones and be like, yo, I'm kind of sick right now. I might die. You know what I mean? So don't come near me, you know, that type of thing. So, but what's interesting is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran the bee. Now, the bee cross-pollinates, right? It goes, there's a bunch of them out there. If you take a look out in the garden later, just watch them how they're going to the lavender, and they're going over here, and they're going over there, right? And they take this collection of different pollen from different things, and they go back to a hive, and they make a cure. So the thing is the cross-pollination is very needed, right? And that's what I call my friend Tobias is the cross-pollination project. That's what we need to do, culture immersion, right? You can call it different terms, whatever you want, but that needs to happen. And that's where the cure lies in, because seeing this is all interconnected, right? That's why I talked about tawbah, istiqamah, haqiqah, because getting to the realization that we're all interconnected no matter how you may see it, right? And it's like the Prophet ﷺ said, you know, if one part of the body aches, then the whole body aches, right? That's how we should see our ummah, but our world in general. You know what I mean? It's the Prophet ﷺ's ummah is the whole world as of right now. You know what I mean? So it's not just the Muslims. And if we don't begin to look at other people's problems, they'll become our own. And that's just what happens with the reality of it. So the reason why I'm saying that again is that it's these interactions, and then when we understand that there's certain gifts that are given to certain people and certain gifts that are given to certain people sometimes, and when we begin to meet in a place of balance and medium, that those exchanges can happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's unfortunately, it's only like places that we get forcefully put in sometimes that begin that process, right? We don't want to get into forceful situations all the time, but like a forceful situation is like you feel obligated to go to Hajj, right? Now, forcefully puts you into a situation where everything is, there's no difference here. We're all standing on the plane of Arafat together. That's the real reality.
Yeah.
You know, that's our reality. Now, the faster we come to that conclusion, moving throughout this journey of the dunya, well, then we get gardens.
Right.
You know, and that's what we're supposed to ultimately begin to leave, is a little bit of garden for everybody. The Prophet ﷺ said, any circle of dhikr is like one of the gardens of Jannah. Yeah. Right? And so we should be leaving that. When you take a look at some of the greatest Islamic societies, they always had these beautiful gardens, right? And it wasn't just the garden. Imagine the people that were in it, though.
Yeah.
You know, so, but the gifts, again, realizing that everybody has a gift.
Right.
Right? And that you have to put on the lens of optimism. That's the thing the Prophet ﷺ talked about. You have to begin to put that lens on. And it's only through those interactions that you can do that. It's coming outside of self. You know, this is like levels of introspection, right? So it's coming outside of like understanding that, okay, I've been given something. I have some skills and abilities here. There's another interaction of life that I haven't really seen yet. Let me go and see that. And how can I help out in that process? And maybe how can they help us? Because all of the interactions that I've had, like especially like some of the common things, and I'm talking about people that are in their 30s, 40s, especially that come from suburban lifestyle sometimes, is there's a plethora of organization, there's a plethora of knowledge, there's a plethora of just, accolades, right? But there's not a lot of confidence sometimes. There's a lack of worldly experience. There's a lack of, like not really having a lot of empathy because we've never encountered it before until it hits us, right? Like even now the situation is like for the Palestine situation is now the students are getting arrested, right? So now it's like, hey, our children are getting arrested. Well, there's been a lot of children getting arrested. Yeah. You know what I mean? So what have we done? There's a lot of other, things that are going on. And I'm not saying I'm not talking about even the non-Muslim community. I'm just saying the Muslim community. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's something just to think about. But again, these gifts, right? And I think we have to understand, we have to give the platform to certain people for, and they have to be vetted people as well. Right. that there is these amazing gifts out there that we're not taking advantage of. You know.
So how did you end up getting in this? Like now we're in this place where you're establishing ways of reentry, first of all, from prison, and then the second part is you're not just working with individuals who are coming out of prison or in prison. You're also working with a community that's like me, right? Like students in colleges that are just local to a masjid, and you're kind of like the bee in this case, right? Like you're kind of working that regard. So I mean, you clearly, I know you want to say something, so how about you say what you want to say?
No, I'm going to go ahead. How is what? Finish with that.
How is your approach? Because you did mention a lot of things, like literally a second ago, about like the things like when we're driving force not understanding empathy, because how else can you understand what other people are going through? Like you're talking about different problems in different parts, but it does seem like the conclusion of this seems to be the method, not conclusion, but the solution seems to be a community-driven through a lens of cross-pollination and understanding, as well as pursuit of knowledge, right? Those are kind of the general themes I'm getting. So from my understanding, that's currently what you're trying to build as well.
So one of the things I think that happens, let's take a look. Let's give you an example. Most individuals that come into some interaction with Islam and then convert, what is their process here? So let's say in LA, they go to the masjid, they may take shahada. There may be some follow-up class that they may take, and there's very minimal mentoring and really outlets unless they begin to travel and do certain things as well, right? That is a defect in our community. That's a problem, right? Let's say that. But also too, it's not just that, like, we're not doing our job. It's also too a missed opportunity of beautiful energy that's ripe for the taking. Let's take it like just that type of opportunity. That you have a new individual that's probably very enthusiastic about their change, needs some guidance, needs some help, and is willing to help in that time. Now for us, let's take a look at what happens usually. We're Muslim, we've been Muslim for some time, we go, cool, we like to help out maybe with this program and things of this nature, but you don't have like a huge volunteer base of 1,000 people or all the people at Juma coming. There's actually usually going to be some core individuals, about 10 to 20 to 30, that are really going to be the movers and the shakers of the community, right? Now, with these new individuals, we always need people to replenish those people, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always bring those people, but we don't take advantage of some of the skills and abilities that they have, right? And a lot of times we get very caught up on investing in the actual formation of a building instead of the formation of the hearts. And we're kind of doing it backwards. You get what I'm saying? And so I'm concerned about those individuals because they're looking for something, right? It's there. They actually came to the truth, and now it has to be presented to them in some way. And a lot of times, certain individuals, especially one of the reasons why we even have this house here, is because of the barrier in their mind that it comes to entering into an institution sometimes. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And also, too, there's a lot of complexities and red tape with our communities, you know what I mean? And some of these things are very simple. It's just offering them some basic instruction on what we believe in, how to pray, how to answer some of those internal questions about doubt, you know what I mean? Just stuff like that. So, but then one of the things that I realized also too, being on the minbar for a while now, and just putting different types of people on the minbar, is that our overall messages in our communities aren't really coordinated. Okay, so what I mean by that is, give an example. Let's say you had all them different Islamic institutions around, let's just say LA. Yeah. That we're all going to have a theme for the month. Every month we're going to have a theme, and we're going to put it out into the community. right? It doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be like, you know, like when the kings and stuff put out their stuff. You know, I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
But it's like we're going to be on the theme of love. We're going to be on the theme of truth. We're going to be on the, you know what I mean?
Right.
And you had these themes going out. And we're going to have strategic programs just once a month or every other month that we're going to bring the communities together just to eat and have a little talk. Just these little things, these implementations will make huge changes.
Yeah, it takes care of the cross-pollination. It takes care of the conversations. It takes care of spaces. It takes care of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So we have to begin to do things like that. And then it starts from these little places that you get a little band of people.
Yeah.
And then we begin to actually go and introduce these things to the people.
Yeah.
And the new Muslims are critical because their story is so infectious.
Yes.
Right? It begins to grab people like, oh,
Yeah.
wow. You know what I mean? And anybody's story, be honest with you. It's not even just new Muslims. Like your guy's story is amazing.
Sure.
It just has to be, the energy of it has to be taken.
Yeah.
Actually just make some small little change like you guys are doing.
Yeah.
And then now put it onto these different platforms or begin to actually introduce it to the communities, and all the old minds will wake up.
Yeah.
It will happen little by little. You know what I mean? So,
And I will say about the new Muslim thing, just as a side tangent, like
Yeah.
I have realized the same thing, because even in Islam, like when someone converts, right, they're given a fresh start. It's almost
Yeah.
like they're a baby all over again.
Exactly.
And in my head, I always like made the analogy like the same way that a baby is infectious, like, you know, like
Exactly.
naturally, like it's a,
That's a great, oh man,
Yeah.
that's powerful. That's
It's like
great. That's great, because if you take a look at it, right,
Yeah.
what do all the women want to do? They want to smell it. They want to kiss it.
men do. We
That's
soften
what-
our hearts. when
Yeah,
we're
that's what I'm
around a
saying. So
baby.
yeah, that's a great point. It's
Yeah.
powerful. That's
So
amazing.
now you have new
Yeah.
Muslims, and now they're coming into this religion. To you, they're the purest thing that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And we've had examples like that. I mean, he is a local brother. I'm gonna leave his name out because I'm gonna talk about him a little bit. But you know, he converted last year, 2 years ago. We used to take him to IIOC's Dawah class.
Yeah, I remember.
Once every week.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
He got really, 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 really busy. Got some stuff put together for his life, and he's
Good.
working on it. So, haven't been in touch with him recently too much, but from the whole experience, I learned, like, I don't know what happened, but I'm like, oh my god, like, there's no way I'm spending every Saturday driving this guy to a, convert class, and then I'm the one being helped. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I discovered a new community. I met Jamal. Like,
Yeah.
There was.
It changed your whole thing.
Changed my
Yes,
thing.
That's a great example, because one of my friends said the same thing too. He said that I went and started going to the prisons and visiting and just places, period. And he said it changed me.
Yeah.
It made me. I learned from them more than they learned from me.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. It's that pollination.
Yeah, and that's why I think dawah is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about expanding the Muslim ummah; it's strengthening the Muslim ummah that already exists as well.
Exactly.
Right? So
Yeah, that's what it is. And most the funny thing is too, is what I realized, especially a lot of times, is that it's so what they call ripe for the picking.
yeah,
People are looking for this. People, especially the way that our world is working now, people are looking for alternatives. People are looking for answers.
Yeah.
When they see all the killings and they see all the confusion, they don't know which way to go. And Islam offers them a way. Now, yes, our political situation may be just as the same, but from the moral standpoint and what it offers and the alternatives of lifestyle and just coming to truth, that you can actually really begin to really understand life.
yeah,
Everybody's looking for that.
yeah. And it's like,
So,
yeah.
so,
You're also good at the point that eventually, like,
yeah.
these things, like, there's great scholars of the past. They used to disagree. People used to have arguments, but the inherent values and morals were something that were always held in a precedence above like this disagreement, above like quote unquote difference of opinion, all that kind of stuff. So the reason why I'm just touching that too is, the solution is a community driven result that focuses on the central points that Islam has to teach you. And then guess what? You can argue, right? But the thing is, you'll have a lot softer of a heart if you have cross-pollination within your arguments.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Otherwise, it's internal turmoil. But I'm branching off into another topic.
No, that's a good point. I mean, I think one of the things that knowledge does, right? One of the things that they first teach you, and when I actually got to a formal class and got like an ijaza, was on the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, right? Rahimahullah. And one of the first things they teach you, the hadith of rahmah. Right, which is basically if you have mercy upon the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will have mercy upon the one in the heavens will have mercy upon you, right? And one of the things that knowledge is supposed to do, true knowledge, experiential knowledge, is expand your capacity for mercy and give information in a way that's going to ultimately facilitate the growth. Right? So even with differences of opinion, you'll see some of the ulama. There was one ulama that was so, one of the scholars that was so vast in his knowledge, he could almost find a difference of opinion for everything and actually, give somebody the pass, right? And so I think that's a very interesting point, because us as Muslims, and especially as any type of leaders, and I'm not a scholar, but one of the things that they are supposed to facilitate is the growth, right? And look at the particular problems of the people and see, okay, how do we get them out of this situation?
Right.
We have substance abuse issues, so many things that we have to look at in a very broad way to say, okay, how do we get them out of that?
Yeah.
How does it become something that we draw them out of that? And then actually not only take them out of that, but now we're able to utilize, and I'll give this one example, then we can just go on. There was a scholar named Sahnun from, I think, outside of Tunis. And there was a brothel, like he had taken over as a judge. Like actually one of the righteous caliphs or the righteous sultans of the time wanted him to be a judge. And he said, he did like a test on him, what if I tell you if there's a man that's right for the job? And, the sultan did a test. What if I tell you there's a man that's right for the job? What should I do? He said, you should tell him to do it. Okay, if he doesn't take it, you should force him. And then if not, then you should whip him. Right? And he said, you're this man. And so he tried to get away from it. But then he said, if I do this, the first people that I'm going to take the judgment are going to be the ruling authority, like you and your family. Yeah. And he said, okay. Right? And so he did that. But then there was a situation where there was like a prostitution going on in a certain area. And he went to the brothel. They burned it down. He took the mistress of the house and put her amongst the salihin so she could be rectified. But see, understanding that's a powerful position. Yeah. She was able to actually orchestrate this. She was able to organize it. Yeah, it's dark, but she's got some qualities here.
Yeah.
Let's just flip her mind, understand it, and then let her go, and she's going to be very powerful. That's the type of mindset you need. You see what I'm saying? That's what changes things. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah, so that's the community development.
It comes back to the masjid is a house for the sick and not a, what's that saying?
Yeah, the house of the sick, it's a hospital.
It's a hospital, for the sick, not a place for the pious to flaunt themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you have those mentalities, you have that outset, you have that look, that mindset, that look, it begins to be something different.
Right.
You know what I mean? So ultimately, that's how I see it. Now, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us and others as well speaking abilities to begin to get onto these platforms at some places. I think there's a huge push, especially with the whole Gaza situation and Rafah and everything that's happening in Sudan and all that we're looking differently at ourselves now. We're getting actually inspiration from some of the beautiful yaqeen that they have, and looking at that the establishment that we find ourselves in isn't really for us. You know what I mean? It's not, there's certain benefits you can take from it, but it's not for us. Yeah. Right? And it's not for really what we corely believe in. And I don't just mean tawheed or things of that nature, because it won't question you on those things really. But what it will question you on is some of the ways in which we interact with the world, especially from a financial situation, from how we perceive morality. It will question you on all of that. But we have a chance here. And in this moment, people are looking for alternatives. And finally, we can actually look into our community, see some of the holes, see some of the good things that happened from the past. Like, I work with a certain institution. They did a lot of things, especially in the 90s and stuff like that. It was really great. Now it's time to take it to 2.0. It's now to work on community for our overall communities. We've done great things to establish buildings and even sometimes intentional communities. Yes. But we have to now go into the depth of investing in the hearts. Yeah, we have the infrastructure, but now we need to actually fill the infrastructure. Exactly. So we have to do that. And we kind of did it backwards. You know what I mean? So, but it happens for whatever reason. So a lot of it came from like Muslims around the world
supporting America, like
Subsidizing. It was
right?
subsidized.
So
Yep.
that's what you can't subsidize community though, right? So that's why now we have empty buildings to fill instead of the other way around.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I've seen over the course of just changing some of the presentations or the message that goes on in the minbar, I've seen a community change, which I thought was very interesting to watch. And that was a great gift from Allah Azza wa Jal to actually watch. Yeah. That from a couple rows, not even just the amount of people, just the actual genuine demographic of people start coming out because they hear a message that resonates with them. Yeah. Right. And that's what we need is I was giving a speech the other day and the brother came up and said, this is kind of what we need to hear. And it wasn't anything special. Right. You know what I mean? It was just getting down to the essence of things because many of us come into the masajid broken. You know what I mean? We do. We come in, we got scars from the day. You know what I mean? Whether it be financially, whatever the situation is. And how do we make sense of it? And then how do we develop from it? Do you know what I mean? And we've had a certain presentation of Islam in this country for some time, and some of it's offered some really good things, and there's other things there's other alternatives. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Of things that are available in our deen, like you said, the ulama that are available that we need to really look into. So, but community development stemmed from my prison outreach. Yeah. Because it reminded me and gave me an alarm that there's a need. Yeah. And then, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put me in certain positions where the same situation that I found of the neglect there, that ultimately that there's a demographic within our community that may not be look the same or maybe from quote unquote, whatever you want to call it, privileged reality, but still has that disconnect from feeling accepted by community. Yeah. There still is that too as well. 100%. And just with a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of community, and a little bit of programming that we kind of intentional programming to bring people together, you see a tremendous change. Yeah. Tremendous change because everybody's looking for family, everybody's looking for friends, everybody's looking for the answers, connection. Yeah. You know what I mean?
There was a study that was done by this. So basically in Dubai, they have like different ministers for their government, and their food ministry government hired an American company to, and this is all like private information that I don't know if I should put on a podcast, but I got a private talk from an individual who works for this company. So I'm going to leave the company name out, but they did a private investigation and study on how to influence youth in Dubai, Muslim youth specifically. Okay. And what they derived after a year of doing their entire study and testing different things, and they created an entire brand around an entire company. They had third spaces. They had, they were actually the ones responsible for the Abrahamic house in Dubai, which is basically like it has like the Abrahamic faiths within one building, but different sections. So they were the ones behind that entire thing. So they essentially derived, people want, young individuals have one goal above all else, and that is to find out who they are as their identity. And the most effective way to give someone an identity and influence someone's identity is to give them connection, and not just connection to like the thing that you want them to connect to, but connect them to like everything, because the one who enables them to connect is the one they will follow. And so it's like what you're about to say is how we go about this is we just have to be the means of connectedness, because Islam was meant to connect us as an ummah, and regardless of who we are to connect with, because Islam is enabling us to do that, we always come back to Islam, because that is the greatest connector of all. So that was a little bit of a modernism.
No, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, because those things are needed, because it's through these initiatives sometimes, or through those type of studies, when they begin to see that, and especially pull out the data, right, and do a data analysis, that you can begin to see how things line up. Yes. You know what I mean? And it's just simple things like the Prophet ﷺ, I think it was, I forgot who did they said he did like 500,000 dishes that he gave out in his lifetime. It's amazing. Like 500 bowls of food. Yeah. 500,000. It's something astronomical number. But it was just these connections, right? And so when you take a look at the Prophet ﷺ, in every single moment, they would mention, like, it would feel like he was always talking just directly to them. Yeah. Right? That was the law gave him that ability, that he always gave connection, or like they would say that there was no better teacher.
Yeah, we feel like he's still talking to us directly.
Well, he is. And so that's the reality, right? Yeah. Those hadith is, his reality isn't dead. Yeah, it's alive, right? So there's always points of connection. So the thing is that it's these things, and I think we have a unique opportunity, and I think that ultimately what needs to happen for anybody who has ever listens to this, inshallah ta'ala, somebody, that especially in this moment, we need to do like the Prophet ﷺ and listen to the youth. Mm-hmm. That's one a very interesting thing. And one of the things that in Surah Al-Kahf is first about the youth, right? So when we come into that, that's number one. Listen to what the youth is aspiring to do. Encourage also to, for our community to develop that we don't have to stay also to within inside of these boxes to be accepted or to even prosper. We don't have to. And that coming outside of the box of even in our occupations and our educational development means coming also to outside of the box of our ways of thinking and certain things and about what we think about people and seeing opportunity in places where other people don't see opportunities. Right? Where people have neglected and left away because I was at an event yesterday, and Cornel West said a very interesting thing. I think he said that truth, the reality of truth, that it allows like the oppressive reality to speak its truth. That's just the reality of truth. Like that your neglect and your harm that truth actually brings out, that you allow that to speak. Right? So a lot of times what we do is sometimes we have to let the neglected aspects that we have done in our community, and we have to identify those and let that speak. Yeah. Let it actually speak. Like, okay, we haven't done this well. Then we need to change. Right. And that takes a lot of, I guess you would say, matzah. I guess that's a way that they put it in Italian, from the leaders of the community. Yeah. Because we have to, that's another thing we have to do is really accept that, because it's hard. It's a hard thing for when you put a lot of effort into something to accept.
It's not a pretty process.
Yeah. No, it's not a pretty process. So that, and just in general, just have these things that you've mentioned and others have mentioned as well about just little points of interaction and connection to begin to do this,
Yeah. And so also I know we're like running overtime.
No, that's fine.
To like conclude it and wrap that up, I'd like to know what are some of the projects you're working on now, as well as the ones that people can plug themselves into, because there will be people who watch this, and I mean, your story and everything that you shared as well, like, revitalized me and reminded me why I'm like into this stuff in the first place and what I should be doing in my life. So if you can go into a little bit about the projects that you're currently working on and specifically what they do, because they kind of all fall in line of what you're saying. Like, I don't think I've heard of a single thing from you or seen a single thing from you that doesn't fall into what you were saying. So you're truly pursuing this as your full-time like life. So
inshallah,
what are you up to?
If anybody's got a good job that pays about $1 million a year, you can always let me know. But alhamdulillah. But one of the first things I think, ultimately we have the situation with Link Outside, which is a prison outreach program that services about 46 different states in the United States of America when it comes to correspondence, meaning via mail, for inmates who are pursuing Islam, interested in Islam, or are Muslim. Also to not just mentoring or correspondence, but mentoring, educational material, books, re-entry information, and also too when it comes to legal litigation that we give information to as well, like certain organizations or people that they can go to. So that's one. One of the things, the projects that I'm specifically trying to focus on this year is actually through the different apparatuses such as like the Shura Council and other places up in the Bay, is beginning to knock on certain doors to say, hey, look, this is an actual Islamic need that needs to be funded. Our portion of zakat needs to go to this from the communities. Right. And that from just a little bit of finances, which it is zakat eligible, but actually going out and petitioning now, because I guess for probably the last 5 years or 6 years now at least, we've actually built a good, I guess you would say, case study of just volunteering, and then we've probably affected at least, 10,000 individuals, right?
All in Central LA.
All in LA, but all centralized in LA, out from my home and everything, that we've probably donated, like 40,000, but 30,000 books, thousands of courses, and all these different types of things that we followed up, and we've done that, certificates and life-changing things, probably about 50 different individuals that are actually actively in the communities doing things. So we've got a really good model, right? And so now it's time to fuel the model. So actually going to the different communities and saying, hey, look, this is zakat eligible. We should take a portion out of it. And then if we say take, because some of these communities have $1 million in zakat more. So if we take collectively just a little bit from each one, maybe like $500,000, not only can we actually give a person a job that hasn't been previously incarcerated in a very noble, for a noble cause, and that changes their life, and that will probably change about 3 different generations, right? But also too, we can affect 10,000 or 20,000 people very easily, and find even more resources and books and other things probably for free that are even out there, because people don't do searches for that. There's people giving away a lot of things, right? So that's one of the things that I'm specifically doing. Also, too, we have what they call a dawah to dawah model, which is the calling to healing, which is kind of what we talked about here, right? Is actually getting people from the different communities, giving them a place and a space to actually feel comfortable, get some teachings, but also to go out into the communities and show them some alternatives and to just make the community feel whole. Another thing currently that we're working in within the place that we're taking this podcast from is that there's going to be a community center here, right? This is going to be from what they call TAY Youth, which is Transitional Age Youth. That's going to be here. That's going to be headed by Tobias Tubbs and a few other people as well. That's going to have permaculture, gardening. That's going to have also to workforce development and also to social emotional learning. So not only are we reaching out to the Muslim community, but also to the non-Muslim community through different grants that have been afforded by LA as well. So that's primarily the situation that I want to get into, is building community out this year through these different apparatuses such as this house, and also too as all the different masajid that are just around, actually doing intentional programming that's going to bring or do the cross-pollination. Right. That's one of the biggest things. And then also to the prison outreach aspect, cultivating more unique individuals that will come into the community and be those dynamic forces that begin to kind of push change of mindset and give people a different perspective, right? And cultivating those people, because the same situation happened with like Malcolm Rahimullah. It's one person if you take a look at his life, and this can show you the process, wrote him a letter, gave him some great confidence, and said that you were this type of person. He had an individual, you take a look at the movie, he had an individual that shook him up a little bit. And why are you doing this? Why are you not just staying to your natural place? Why are you trying to shape and form yourself around an ideal that's not really yours? The same situation. Came home, gave him a little bit of a platform. His brilliance was understood, even though it was all in things that we don't agree with. But then finally, because he's a person of truth, he comes to truth. And now it has impacted millions of people to not only become Muslim, but also to become activists. So that's the process. It's not complex. It doesn't need to be, now we can have contact lists and Excel sheets and, what's the name of it? They have like Susan and these other different programs now that you can make it into a case study and all these different things. We have that now, alhamdulillah, but it's still the same process. It's actually about somebody reaching out and caring. It
all starts with the grassroots thing of like how you were at Al-Hadaya and there's 15 people going to the masjid at Fajr, right? And the only thing that someone cared about was an auntie in the community who you help bags with, and it's like, oh, you should probably go there. That's where it starts. That's
exactly. It's just those small little acts of kindness that mean something. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it's at. I mean, I know it sounds probably pretty simple, but it's actually really complex.
No, I'm sure.
You know what I mean? So it's just trying to reach out to professionals such as yourself and grabbing. One of the big things also too is actually working with the USC students, and the reason why is because I know my friend Tobias has done more than a little bit of that, but also too it reminded me again about the importance of grabbing youth, because before the mind gets just set into the routine of just going and getting a job and career, and it gets almost individualized, that put a collective stamp somewhere in the mind that like, now we're a little bit, our world is much bigger, or my personal life is actually much bigger than what I personally think. It's actually, it should focus, some level should be focused on some community development, some community participation, you know what I mean? And I think that's where we need to kind of get back to that, because the culture can make you selfish. It's very individualistic, So that's really it, my dear brother. I mean, that's, and if you have any more questions.
I mean, I think that's good enough for today. But I'll definitely, inshallah, do another podcast where we can dive into
inshallah ta'ala. Now, definitely in specific subjects too is really, Alhamdulillah. Thank you for coming out this morning, inshallah, and then we'll get called here.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. Rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
See you guys in the next episode, inshallah.